One of the things Nike teaches you for sure is to focus on the experience of the athlete. And in Nike lens, if you have a body, you are an athlete.
You've come from this, your whole career in sports, live entertainment, and now like really moving not sort of saying out of sports, but sort of bringing in sports and other types of entertainment and other types of live entertainment into what you're doing at Fever. Um, that's amazing that you're doing that, and I think a lot of people are, may know Fever on a local level, but I mean this is a global business that you're now helping run.
Yeah, I mean, again, I guess better to be lucky than good. And in terms of, I was introduced to the founders of Fever, which is based in Madrid, right? It was one of the reasons why I think it has, and the vision of it was astounding. Basically, three founders who were from Spain but had been largely educated in America had asked the question, why hasn't somebody created the Netflix of live experiences, right? And by what they were meant by that is what Netflix does incredibly well is it watches what Wayne is watching. It says, hey, Wayne, based on all the data we can pick up on you, other people who look like Wayne also like these programs. And if we create this type of content, we're pretty confident you're also going to like that. So these guys said, how do you do that in live experience? Live experience is very fragmented, right? But how do you do that? So to do that, you need a data set, right? You need the equivalent of Netflix's kind of like platform, right? So they created something called Secret Media. So Secret Philadelphia, Secret New York, Secret London, Secret Dubai, Secret everywhere. And what that is, it's a local discovery platform about cool things to do in your city. And in fact, 95% of that content isn't anything to do with Fever. It's just cool things, right? We have editorial teams who are like, oh, there's brunches, there's hikes, but where that makes sense to intersect, we do put in some things around it. But that's really just a massive data set that allows us to have the finger on our pulse on what people are interested in at the moment and where there's interesting correlations. So that's one piece. Secondarily, they said, hey, what live experience creators are usually good at is the live experience. What they tend to be less good at is some of the business operations behind it. Everything from ticketing platforms, pricing optimization, marketing, customer service. So how do you provide a business that provides best-in-class services there at a reasonable price with as minimal friction as possible? And then third, kind of like Netflix, if you take all of that data, it should lead you into where there are gaps in the marketplace that you can serve in live experience, or you can de-risk decisions. So one thing that Fever is famous for, was Candlelight Concerts. And the insight there is that there is a big delta between people who listen to, let's say, Taylor Swift on Spotify and people who are lucky enough to once in a lifetime get to a Taylor Swift concert and be able to afford it and bring their family. The middle point in there is a live experience around Taylor music that people love to come together on, but is much more accessible in their city. Right? And so with that, they've done a lot in music and entertainment. Sports was a gap. And so now, we focus on how do you authentically connect in the sports landscape? How do you have an offering that kind of connects with sports? And so now, kind of proud to say, I think the reach in sports is getting there. Partnerships with folks like LIV Golf and SailGP and FC Barcelona, and just announced something with Baller League and Inter Miami, right, and Freedom Park. So now expanding into the sports realm, in a much bigger way. But the genius of the business was the core business acumen and the insight behind it.
Really fascinating, really fascinating. I mean, and you talk about all these amazing things that you've done and throughout your career and all the things that have taken you all over the world to do these things. And at the same time, your spouse, she's also a rock star and and doing all
That
this.
is
And you
true.
guys have kids.
Yes. I mean, I will say this. We met at IMG. You always hire people who are smarter than you. And once upon I did, and then she figured out she was smarter than me, and she left, and she's an entrepreneur. And one of the things, she's now on her third company called Zillions AI, which is a brand platform, AI platform that allows brands and consumers to co-create things. But one of the things I'll say, and I guess you didn't realize at the time, but you got to work with amazing people at IMG Day. One of our dear friends, Kate Johnson, who runs kind of sports entertainment at Google now. I saw her speaking at World Congress of Sport a couple of years ago, and she was talking about finding your voice as a female in the sports industry. And, we caught up after, and she's like, Mark, I got to tell you, the first woman I ever saw in the sports industry not afraid to use her voice was Michelle, right? She was always one who didn't understand why things had to be the way that they had been done, and wanted to make sure that there were different perspectives, and particularly a female perspective, right? Kind of at the table. And so that's the thing, so it's one of those things that you just kind of grow into, kind of like where you are, right? I don't think we have ever plotted the journey as, some people may know. I mean, my wife is Australian, from Brisbane, Australia. So during COVID, we went from Portland, right, to Brisbane, Australia, which, and I remember, the long journey there and reading the guidebook, like, oh, what do you do in Brisbane, right? Like these kinds of things, which is, and now fascinating because fast forward, the worlds are crazy, but the Olympics 2032 will be in Brisbane, Australia. And so if you think about the cities, you've gone from London to Rio to Tokyo to Paris to LA and then Brisbane. And I can tell you, having spent considerable amount of time in Brisbane, it is not like those other cities today. It has got a long way. It is going to be a very different type of games. But yeah, worlds colliding, for sure.
Well, we know who, during the Brisbane games, I know who to call, So.
I will say, but one of the things, right? And and actually, you know what? I'm gonna give another one. You just sparked, if you don't mind, another. Anyway, one of the things that we got to do at Nike was really, one of the things Nike teaches you for sure is to focus on the experience of the athlete. And in Nike lens, if you have a body, you are an athlete, right? So focus on the experience, and I can't tell you how much folks at Nike obsess every step of the consumer journey. So one of the things that we saw is that, as you know, there was kind of pushback, the kind of like the version of American football that kind of is violent, or can be violent and can lead to injuries. We saw, drops off in participation. And what that also meant was drop offs in sales around football products, right? Around cleats, around all type of gear around football. So how do you combat that, right? You have to increase the TAM, the total addressable market. So using the relationship with the NFL and our activation dollars, we really push to say, hey, we've got to expand this out. So how do you do that? You got to have a non-violent version for boys who want to play, and by the way, that's really good for all the females out there who want to play a version of football. So really fought hard to make sure that we could invest those activation dollars in things like making football a high school varsity sport in every state, and how do you use an Olympic moment to make flag football a bigger deal. And that was things that when you're at a Nike and you have that kind of vision and you have that kind of market power, you can make things happen, right? And so it's really great to see the energy going around flag football. And folks like Tim Ellis, CMO, and Ian Trombetta at the NFL, were great partners then. It's amazing to see them highlighting all these amazing young creators, these young female athletes, right, using the NFL platform. I can't tell you how much I admire what they did, because when I was at the NFL, you didn't have that same connection with the fans. You didn't speak to the fans, and I think they're doing a phenomenal job bringing that brand into kind of relevant terms for today's audiences.